one's as much of an advocate for this digital stuff as I am. So what you were hearing in the introduction there was the HX Stomp XL, and I was kind of interested when I read that Joe Satriani a few months ago had been using SansAmp plugins for his album, and which is, you know, I think the experience of a lot of us kind of guitarists at home. We're super happy using digital modelers when we're recording and headphones and all that sort of stuff. What I think each of us kind of have experienced live is that for some of us, you know, if you're only going straight to PA with a digital modeler, sometimes what the experience is like is totally different. So if you imagine, you know, you were gigging with a Vox AC30 and suddenly you took away your actual stage volume and all you heard was the sound of a 57 in front of an AC30 coming back at you from the monitors, I think that's probably closer to what it's actually like to gig with a digital modeler. Unless, and this is I think the conclusion that I'm coming to, you really do need to insist, or I do, that I'm allowed as a guitarist to make some noise on stage. Do you know what I mean? Like there is a drummer over here, and the guests, they don't mind the sound of a guitar, right? In fact, some of them might even enjoy a guitar solo. And if the noise of the guitar is so bad that you as a sound man can't cope with it, then maybe do sound for a band without a guitar. Do you know what I mean? That's how I'm starting to feel about this. Like, so I'm going to be kind of like, I'm making some stage volume because I'm being paid here to make a noise that people are paying me to make. Do you know what I mean? So I've kind of got over the issue. I think I'm trying to get over the issue of, you know, some people keep asking you to bring your stage volume down, even when it's not unreasonable. I'm getting asked sometimes by a specific person who I think may have a slight issue with me. But anyway, I didn't want to interview for his job, soz mate. Anyway, so yeah. So what I'm coming to realise is maybe just take a real amp to get that real cab kind of feel on stage. Maybe that is what I'm missing when I'm playing live. It's not the real amp or the amp in the room thing, it's the cab in the room thing. So I'm going to take a real amp. Anyway, here's how I came to this conclusion.
So, interestingly enough, I think you may have remembered I did a video a few weeks back when Joe Satriani had kind of been doing some press around his album, The Elephants of Mars, John Carter, Something to Do with Elephants, a Zoo. Anyway, one of the key things that had happened in that recording process was that they had recorded using the SansAmp plugin, quite an old plugin as it happens, recorded all of these tracks DI with SansAmp, and they had tried reamping in bits and pieces and tried to make a choice, and they came back and they found that the SansAmp plugin was what they felt sounded most like what they wanted. And he's elaborated on this now. Actually, they ran it through some outboard kind of compressors and bits and pieces like that. But in any case, it was a bit of a revelation, I think, to Joe. He was choosing to use these plugins, and it was also a revelation for me to hear it written down by, you know, like a pro guitarist who has access to some of the finest recording engineers, presumably, in the world, and the finest studios, to express the difficulty that there can be when recording with a real amp. You know, when you're in the control room, it sounds very different to how it sounds in the room. That amp in the room sound really only exists if you're stood in the room with your ears with a real amp, right? And, you know, he said, you know, you quickly recall that microphones are not ears, it's just a different thing. And so that was interesting to me. Now, it turns out he's done another interview where he's talking now about how he still loves to use his real amps live. And in that interview, he actually talks about like the level of volume that he has. Like, he's using Marshalls live, right? And he talks about being able to run them at 110 decibels on stage. Now, I think that's way beyond the level that most of us guitarists would be allowed to use live. And I think what this kind of, there were some other things that he said that were interesting to me. So let me just find those. He was asked, does he use in-ears? And, you know, he said, no, I hate the sound of in-ears. Basically, I could sort of relate to this in a way. So he said that with in-ears, it doesn't feel like you can get away from the sound. You know, you're kind of stuck with what you've got to some extent. Now, if you have your own engineer and stuff like that, like presumably Joe Satriani would have on tour, I'd imagine you could probably get some fairly reliable results. But for me personally, when I do the sorts of gigs that probably you and I both do, you know, whether they're depth gigs for function gigs, or, you know, you're kind of not in a situation where it's like a super professional setup. Oftentimes, kind of the results with in-ears are super variable. Sometimes there's not really time to get those mixes really nailed down, and, you know, there might be too many keyboards. Things change all through the show as well, especially if you've got certain people on sound. And for me, in-ears have never really been like astonishingly good. There was one stint in Israel where we played the same venue sort of for 28 nights, and I was in charge of the sound. And for me and the drummer, Craig, we were able to get sounds that we really liked in our ears, and it was consistent night after night because we didn't have to change anything, we didn't have to set up or pack down, it was just all there ready to go. So I think in that kind of scenario, maybe that's what would be more conducive to a better in-ear experience. For me, what I like to do with in-ears, I have been asked this sometimes, is to try and keep the volume low. So that's, I think, the advantage with in-ear headphones is like you've got some noise cancelling going on so you don't get overwhelmed by stage noise. But I think the tendency for some folks is to try and drive their headphones quite loud, and I find that that can get really overpowering quite quickly and probably just as fatiguing as if you have the real instruments happening. So I try to keep that volume kind of as low as I can have it and still hear stuff. I don't know if that's a good tip or not, to be honest. Anyway, so he's got amps behind him, 4x12 cabinets. He mentioned in the interview like 110 dB. And at that level, you know, you'd definitely be able to get kind of on-stage sustain and things like that. I don't think any of the normal humans in the world are going to be able to run things that loud any longer. But he also said, which was interesting to me, that he uses old style ear protection, you know, where you're kind of stuffing in these like little foam things into your ears, which I tend to like for live use as well, because it gets rid of like the tinniness of the cymbals. So I find the cymbals hurt my ears, and also some of the sizzly sounds are the things that I really don't like when I'm playing live. And I try to do this, you know, obviously if you're on sound, to some extent you can't get away with doing too much of this, but using ear protection. So he says, what I like to do, which I know is really weird, is when I go to a sound check, I get my sound together, and then once I know that everything sounds right, I put in these really thick foam earplugs that I've worn for over 30 years. It takes about 30 seconds, but my brain then orients itself to understanding what this muffled thing is that I'm hearing, and I get to play the whole show. Then when I come off stage, I can still hear the birds chirping in the morning because I've been wearing hearing protection, which I think is pretty good advice, but it kind of also shows me that the tone thing is possibly a little bit over the top. What we probably want as guitarists, if we're happy to kind of shave off these frequencies to protect our ears, which I certainly am happy to do, what I'm looking for from my on-stage sound is to have some element of reinforcement, so it's not just what's in my ears, or it's not just what's coming out of front of house. And this is another interesting point that he made. So he says, I think that's really what it is. If you're in a stadium and you're watching animals as leaders, it'll be fine, because you're so far away from them, you'll be hearing all the PA and it will sound brilliant. If you're in a small club, you might hear drums only and you'll be like, well, where are the guitars? And I think that's been my experience with some shows these days, because the sound man or person is going to be focused so much on, you know, the things that matter. So drum sound is always where they start, right? If you've been to a sound check, it starts with drums. You know, they're going to be focusing on vocals. Can you hear the vocals over the drums? If you've got keyboards in the band, you know, they might be important. The guitar is almost the least important thing to a lot of these things. You know, they'll check, have you got level? What's your loudest sound? Okay, that's fine. So I think you're responsible as a guitarist, and this has been my experience, for trying to make that more enjoyable for yourself. That means for me actually that having some sort of on-stage reinforcement probably is almost crucial to actually enjoying it. So this might mean a power cab, a Laney LFR, or it might mean like someone like Aaron from Intervals does. He runs the Fractal into like a real tube power amp. I know Tosin from Animals as Leaders used to do this. You run out without a cab into the return of an amp. This sort of thing, which then gives you that real cab feel, right? And that could be a big thing. So I just wanted to try this now. I've not turned this on yet, but I've just plugged into the return of my Mesa Boogie Nomad 45. As we said, like, we're going to be kind of putting our earplugs in, so it doesn't necessarily even matter as long as things aren't super spiky, that to me is my main thing, that I want things to be smooth if they're supposed to be smooth. As long as I've got that, and this is coming out of my area of the stage, then I've got some amount of stage volume that is going to sort of not be on par with the drums, but you know, slightly quieter than drums, I presume. You don't want to try and compete with drums, I don't think, because they're naturally then going to get louder and louder. But some stage volume I think has got to be okay, unless you're in a really weird situation or you've got a very fussy sound person. And then the PA is not your only place that people are going to be hearing guitar from, because I think if you're trying to compete with keys, vocals, bass guitars, drums, and it's all going through the same PA, I do think that that's very easy to get lost in. And I think that's so much of why people like to have a real amp on stage, because at least you're then not just competing with everyone else, you've got your own kind of thing going on too. So what does this actually sound? So my clean seems fine. If I just switch onto a lead, okay, that's worked really well as well. So my rhythm, I've just left the IRs on. I'm just plugging out the headphone output into the return of this amp, and like it's doing what I want. It's giving me that amp feel. So that's just, again, giving me the confidence to think, right, if Joe Satriani has all the money to get this stuff for touring, right, and he's saying, look, the in-ear stuff is not the optimum for me, you know, he's saying these things like, in the studio, I'm using digital stuff, but equally for live, maybe there's a home still for these amps and bits and pieces like that. I think that's just reassuring to know that it's okay to be kind of dipping your feet into both. There's tools for different jobs. You know, like I've experimented with using the Power Cab Live. It's another piece of gear, but equally I could just plug straight with this preset out of the headphone into the return of this Nomad 45, and that to me I could totally use. And even I might just try this on Saturday. I've got a gig, so I think I'm looking for something unfussy that's going to work reliably, and I still want that feeling of having some sort of amp on the stage. And to me, this is maybe going back to where I was many years ago, where I was using full cable method with the Nomad 45 and a Pod XT Live or Pod HD 500. Maybe you might need a real amp on stage as well if you want to really get some stuff out of this, or the Laney LFR or a Power Cab. But I think a key element to what, as a guitarist, if you're going to be doing this thing and trying to get some of that amp feel and some of that feedback and some of this stuff, I think it has to be a little bit noisy. I'm not talking about 110 dB, but I think there needs to be some level of noise. Let me know your thoughts on that. Am I wrong? Have you found things that get you through this? Like maybe a Digitech freakout could be part of the job to get this kind of thing going. But I'd love to know your thoughts in the comments. Thank you for stopping by and putting up with my awkward guitar playing, and yeah, let me know your thoughts. HX Stomp XL I'm going to use on Saturday. I think I'm going to take my first kind of proper tube amp, the Nomad 45, and see how I get on with it, because why not? Catch you in another video soon. Cheers.